We have been blessed by creation and community. The injustice of extractive relationships and systemic racism have fractured both. Let's Talk Rev is all about providing tools and access for communities to build power from the grassroots up for change at the policy level. Our guests are doing this in various ways. Sit back and enjoy this casual, spirited conversation with Rev. Welcome to the Let's Talk with Rev. Today we've got our special guest, Miss Joyce Lanning. We've also got two of our team members with Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, Mr. Kyle Kreider and Abigail Franks. Abby, we're going to kick it off to you first and let you introduce yourself. And then, Kyle, if you would introduce yourself and tell everybody hello. And then we'll pass it on over to Joyce and let Joyce introduce herself from there.
All right. Hey, y'all. Thank you, Rev, for having me, be here in this wonderful conversation that we're about to have. I am Abigail. I work for the People's Justice Council, and I also work for the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. I'm the programs and outreach coordinator, and I love it. I love every second of it. And I'll pass it to Kyle.
Thank you, Abigail. I'm Kyle Crider. I'm the Program and Policy Director for Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the People's Justice Council. It is my honor and pleasure to work with Abigail and Rev and others that cannot be on this call today. But as our guest, I'm very honored and pleased to announce Joyce Lanning. It's actually Dr. Joyce Lanning, but she never claims the doctor part, although she should. I might have met Joyce before what I'm about to say, but my first time to actually get to know and work with Joyce was when I was Energy Program Manager for Alabama Environmental Council, starting at the end of 2014 or so. Joyce was our hardest working unpaid employee. I mean, she put in more hours than any of the paid staff, and we would regularly get emails from her dated all hours of day and night. And even though her background was not in environmental economics and energy issues, she trained herself in this area. She's going to be telling you more about herself, but I'll just end it with she is both my friend and my mentor. I mean, I went to school for this stuff, and I learned so much from Joyce, who did not go to school for this stuff. And so we're very glad to be learning from you still. Joyce Lanning.
Hey, thank you, Kyle. It's mutual on both sides, as my mother-in-law would say. I have learned from you, and if we don't continue to learn from each other, what are we holding hands for and singing this common song together? Rev, I'd like to thank you for your leadership and really in just two the many ways right now for working to make the world a better place. People's Justice Council Summit, energizing the South for energy justice, and also the Southeast Communities for a Green New Deal, because we need a vision for the world that we want to live in. And you're helping shape that vision, you and your helpers, your allies, two of whom we just met. My talk is more limited than our vision that you're helping create. It's based on my concern about the way energy benefits and burdens land. Who gets the most, who pays the most cost, and who gets to decide on those wins and losses. So Alabama, as you know and have pointed out elsewhere, Alabama residents below the poverty line have one of the highest energy burdens in the nation. And the important thing about energy burden is total household energy, which is electricity, gas, and other home heating fuels. But I've spent the last 10 plus years paying closest attention to electricity policy. So that's where I'll focus. And I hate to tell you, more questions than answers, but what I'd like to do is take about 15 minutes to share my story, and then let's talk. First, a little background about how I got here and what that has to do with my care about energy. And then some realities about the Alabama Public Service Commission, which regulates Alabama Power Company's electric energy choices, and the challenges for its customers. Finally, I'd like to say something about what we can do about it. So I was telling Rev, I was fortunate to come from a household with enough of what we needed. And I haven't experienced the same difficulties that many of my fellow citizens deal with daily. But I have sought to learn more and more over the years from folks like you and my other allies. Back in 1982, when I started studying for a PhD in administration of health services, I wanted to learn how to make a medical care system patient-centered. Health beliefs and behaviors are important, inside out considerations, in addition to one's medicine's sort of outside in approach. Well, now I'd like to see more inside out energy production, like community solar, rather than having Alabama Power Company or other monopoly utility companies tell us what we can and can't do to produce and use our own energy. Well, back in the 80s, a shock to my patient-centered view happened when a surgeon cut the nerve to my tongue to remove a bony growth blocking my hearing. I have a very bad hearing loss. He did not tell me in advance that I would lose the taste for a while, that I'd be dizzy, and that my husband would sound like Donald Duck. Things did return to normal, but I wondered why I wasn't given the information that the elective surgery would result in everything tasting like warm sweat. It did. But thankfully, informed consent practices for medical care interventions have definitely improved since then. But not so much in consent for environmental pollution and financial burdens resulting from the way we produce and use energy. That's hidden behind some well-constructed barriers. I'll say more about that later. Well, in graduate school, I got sidetracked from patient-centered care into analyzing cost data. Healthcare costs were rising. My economics background kicked in. Graduating in 1988 with my shiny new credentials, I worked as a consultant for Blue Cross and Blue Shield Health Insurance Company full-time for 3 years, helping them to prove to their customers how the company had helped them save employee healthcare costs. Now, I'm concerned about how energy providers fail to justify the financial and environmental costs that impact their customers. In 1991, I went back to UAB and I became a part-time assistant professor in the Department of Healthcare Organization and Policy. And I taught courses, one of which was improving healthcare quality and outcomes. How can you improve outcomes while still managing costs? Well, now it's how can we improve our negative impacts from energy production on the air we breathe, water we drink, and the stable weather patterns that we need to survive and hopefully thrive, all without breaking household budgets. Well, after 10 years using my PhD, I quit. My commercial real estate attorney husband and I were in our mid-50s. They'd been married 35 years, happy about it, still are. Doing well enough financially with our one child was well launched at almost 30, but my husband wanted to give away more of his time to conserve land. And so I chose to follow his lead and work in environmental causes. I had to learn a lot. He's since spent over 20 years as a pro bono attorney for the Freshwater Land Trust in the Birmingham area. And he's been creating miles of trails and saving acres of lands. He's still happily donating his time, supporting the land trusts and other good nonprofit causes. Well, I volunteered with several environmental groups, the Sierra Club, and ensuing years. But in 2007, I was jolted into a totally another orbit after seeing the movie An Inconvenient Truth and being trained to tell that story. Later that year, I had the trip of a lifetime. I traveled to Antarctica with Jim McClintock. He's a polar and marine biologist at UAB, and it was a climate change challenge tourist educational trip. Well, that continent is melting, and I learned how we humans are a big part of the reason, largely because of the way we choose to energize ourselves, producing planet-warming carbon dioxide in the process. So, what is it we're doing that harms the working of the only planet we know that supports life and the climate we depend on to thrive or perhaps even survive? Well, we're changing the composition of the Earth's atmosphere, primarily from burning fossil fuels and dumping the waste into our air as carbon dioxide. And this increased carbon pollution, as you traps too much extra heat. It can't escape into space. So our additions to our atmospheric chemistry aren't just changing weather patterns, they're also acidifying the ocean and affecting the basis of our water-based food chain. Well, so here we are. I couldn't solve healthcare, and now I've taken on the planet. Ugh. Well, I jumped centered from patient-centered medical care to customer-centered electrical services. But many of the underlying questions are similar since the focus is still customer-centered. Here's some of the, I forgot to start somebody give me a time when I'm at 15 minutes because I forgot to start my timer. But anyway, here's some of the questions that we all face because the electricity business model is undergoing a radical transformation in spite of the many efforts to cling to the destructive status quo. You can look at energy or any economic commodity as a pie. It's important to know what's in the pie, how big is the pie, who can share it, who decides about the pie, as well as who pays the cost and who gets the benefits. So here's some questions, and then of course, they're kind of chewy and we're not gonna be able to answer them, but we can nibble around the edges. Who gets to decide how the electricity sector impacts the environment you depend on, I depend on, we all depend on for a healthy and safe life and livelihood, as well as what we pay for that electricity? How much opportunity do you and I have to affect electricity decisions in order to support our preferences? And what are some of the unintended consequences of decisions and choices about electricity generation and transmission and distribution? Who bears those costs and benefits? Well, how do our costs and benefits of electricity in our state compare with other similar states? Where are the gatekeepers who could help balance those costs and benefits between electricity providers and their customers? The local ones, state, federal? What would an electricity system we would like to live in look like? How can we move forward toward that vision of the future? Obviously, we don't have time for these to chew into them all, but I do appreciate the fact that the visioning process is being supported by this group and also GASP's sort of Green New Deal climate a program for a Clean New Deal. I haven't got the words right, but that is really important work to gather stakeholders together to say, what is it that we really want? Because until we ask for what we want, we have not as good a chance of getting it. But okay, so first we have to recognize we don't have a market for electric services. We have a regulated monopoly. It's been considered a natural monopoly because a single provider can serve us cheaper and two or more can. That might have been the case in the past with large central plants and a we make it, you buy it mentality. With the advent of cheaper solar panels and storage and microgrids, can make some of it, and they should buy it. So our state is divided up into separate territories. Each one has a little monopoly there. We get services either from Alabama Power, distributor members of Tennessee Valley Authority, cooperative organizations, or municipally owned companies. And I started paying close attention to the Alabama Public Service Commission in 2012 because they regulate Alabama Power Company, which supplies electricity to about 2/3 of the state. Well, concerned citizens in 2012 realized that there's an informal meeting annually on the second Tuesday in December, and it's a chance to just listen to what Alabama Power has decided to do to address their pollution issues and how much electricity they supply is going to cost their customers. See, nothing changes because it's already been decided, but it is a once-a-year chance for ordinary citizens to say anything in the PSC hearing room. So we did. We pointed out that the interest rates had gone down since the PSC had last held a rate case 30 years ago. In other states, with more frequent examinations of appropriate rates, regulators had reduced investor-owned utilities like Alabama Power, allowed profits from around 13-14% of their investments to about 10%. as rates had gone down over the years. Well, Alabama Power was still allowed around 13.4 or 5% return on equity or profit. You'll hear ROE. In other words, that's kind of like, okay, what we spend, we make a bunch of, or how much we make on it. It's like a plane took off on autopilot 30 years ago and kept heading in the same old direction with no recognition that the destination airport had relocated as interest rates had changed. So we asked for a formal rate case to look at whether or not the power company merited that high out-of-line return on their equity investments. One commissioner, Terry Dunn, called for that long overdue review. But what we got instead was a more remarkable series of infomercials called Informal Public Proceedings. No utility regulator ever used this informal approach to hear evidence about what rates were required to balance the resource needs of the utility and the customer's rights to dependable electricity at the lowest possible cost, which is the job of the PSC. By the way, you can still watch these hearings, informal public proceedings online, because the League of Women Voters of Alabama, which I was representing at the table, these visits, repeatedly asked for and got a recorded record. It's still there. Anyway, the two gas companies that ended up, they're allowed 13+% ROE was cut closer to 10%. But Alabama Power, it was given a totally new formula. This surprise change hid the fact that they continued to be allowed to return in the 13% range up here. And it used a formula that no other electricity in the country uses. So this extraordinary end run around evidence-based rate setting is only one of many examples of the ways folks that are most impacted are kept in the dark by a system that works behind closed doors with little or no protections for the retail residential customers. You know, I'm an academic, so I finally wrote a blog post about it in 2018. How about a voice for the paying public? Kyle, I'll send you some of these links in case you can stick them in where somebody can get to them if they want to. Well, by law, Attorney General is supposed to represent consumers in practice. And that's only if he or she deems it's in the public interest. But it's not in the AG's private interest to intervene in the smooth relationship between Alabama Power and its regulator if they hope to run for future election in any public office in Alabama. So there are dedicated and capable professional staffers in the Attorney General's office and at the Public Service Commission. But you see, they don't work for us. They work for the elected AG and the PSC commissioners. And we do elect them, but we failed and have failed to pay much attention to how they'll protect our interests or not. Well, PSC electricity staff has said that they remain in very close contacts with Alabama Power staff, even almost daily. They also recognize that the power company has a deep bench of internal and external attorneys, accountants, and professionals who create the budgets and the plans and the requests that are submitted to the PSC. And the small staff at the PSC, admittedly, can't do much more than skim the surface. Also, they aren't allowed to specifically analyze and speak for the public interest, though other regulatory commissions include staff that are assigned the task of reviewing these requests from the consumer's perspective. However, Alabama Power was successful in stopping that practice for the Alabama PSC, calling it a conflict of interest. So there's a question: what is regulatory capture? With such close working relationships and a big imbalance in political and financial resources, a regulatory organization like the Alabama PSC can be dominated by the interests they regulate, like Alabama Power, and not by the public interests. So the result can be that the agency acts in ways that benefit the interest it's supposed to be regulating. And there are many of us whose experience, unfortunately, tells us that Alabama PSC fits that category. And you've probably read about the solar complaint. January 8th, 2013, I was sitting in that PSC hearing room for the regular meeting, and with no advanced notice, I think the filing was December 20th, right before Christmas, and no discussion of impacts. This is when the PSC added this unusually high $5 per kilowatt surcharge on consumers' solar generation if they wanted grid backup. Well, there's some lawsuits and petitions that have gone on since then, and we can talk about those later. But with all of this piling in on me and observing and saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, being a product of the academic world, I posted a white paper in August 2019, Transparency Needed Now, Alabama Power and the Alabama Public Service Commission. It's on a not very well maintained blog that I have. But what I did is I requested, I sent a draft, and I requested and received and incorporated comments from the PSC Administrative Law Judge, John Garner, and he's also the executive director of the PSC, and also Assistant Attorney General Olivia Martin, who's covered the Public Service Commission for years. And I recommended 4 changes in the PSC rules and culture with their review. First, provide the missing information for comparing Alabama Power's allowed earnings with any other similar investor-owned utilities. By one analysis from publicly available data, quote, if Alabama Power's ROE, that's their profit, had instead been the average awarded ROE for the industry each year, 2014 to 2018, Alabama Power customers would have saved $1.02 billion since 2014. That's a lot of cash.
I'm sorry, did you say million or billion?
Billion with a B.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
okay.
and there's a link to that. That's a link to that. So it's the Energy and Policy Organization, and I'll send you that link because we both analyzed it from different angles. The Daniel Tate used publicly available information, and I used what I got from the PSC, and we came to the same place. But anyway, another thing that I recommended was access to and participation in the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan. This is the document that happens every 3 to 5 years all over the country that sort of rules what the utility is planning to do. I actually got to participate as an alternate for TVA's process, which was very, very open and very technical, but at least you get to see the assumptions that are made in coming up with these figures. But unlike other jurisdictions, Alabama faces no PSC requirement for submitting its important plan, and it remains behind closed doors. Now, over the years, as we have pushed for more information, they give us a longer narrative, but we don't see the important guts of the plan. How do they decide what's really needed? This became pretty clear when they applied for a bunch of extra gas resources. So a new plant near Plant Berry and 2 others. And anyway, that's another story. But anyway, we should have access to that process, but it remains behind closed doors. Another thing that I said I wanted to see was I want some legitimate price comparisons. Alabama Power says our prices are below the national average. Well, they're proud to claim that. But the national average includes Hawaii and other very expensive jurisdictions, and Alaska and other states which have very high rates. This average also mixes residential and commercial and industrial rates. Our industrial rates are low. The big guys really have a way into the system that we don't. But in discussions of our high electricity uses and bills, Alabama Power has pointed out that the Southeast differs from in important ways from other sections of the country. Well, that being the case, it's more relevant to compare Alabama Power rates by customer class with other similar investor-owned utilities in the 11 southeastern states. They don't want to do that. However, Mississippi and Georgia have had some problems with, in one case, a plant that was supposed to capture and sequester carbon, and in the other place, nuclear overruns. So their rates may be going up, but Alabama Power's were the highest for a while there. And the last thing that I was pushing for in this white paper was a pre-decision public discussion of consequences and impact on consumers of all major Alabama Power requested orders, well before the commission votes. There is nothing. You go to the commission meeting, it lasts maybe less than an hour, and that includes the pledge and the prayer and the the commissioners' moment to tell what they want to say. So this is done in other places. I asked why it wasn't done here, and they said, "Oh, we tried it, but it was just so contentious, we quit." I was pleased to see a recent report by two very well-respected organizations that suggested some of the same transparency practices, and I'll send you that. It's a practical guide to next generation procurement practices, how to build clean energy. And what they say, flexible, clean, and energy optimization requires a next generation approach. And this report talks about that. And some of those next generation reports include transparency and participation. Okay, all right, getting close to the end. So what can we do to address this inequitable arrangement for deciding our electricity future? It's not easy, or our repeated efforts would have succeeded by now. But here's a few suggestions, many of which you're doing. Help create a vision of the world you want to live in. Okay, the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal is one of those efforts. The Alabama Interfaith Power and Light is another. The People Service Justice Council, GASP. In the city of Birmingham, they are launching their campaign to create a Green New Deal for Birmingham. And they want a climate action plan that's written by and for the people. This is our vision from the ground up. It looks exciting. You can sign up. Energy Alabama in North Alabama is kind of closest to what we're getting. We don't have any watchdogs. We need some in Alabama. We really do. And thank goodness for the Southern Environmental Law Center, because they are the ones that have brought suits to address this inequitable solar charge. Well, that's one. Join these folks, support these folks, learn from them, and give them your input. Another one is come together and raise your voices loudly in support of your vision. Because, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So some of those groups above can help you. I will admit I'm more academic than activist, but there comes a time to make your voices heard, and this is the time. So the third thing is crucial. Protect the right to vote and exercise it, because much of what we hope for will require different attitudes and actions on the part of our elected officials, including PSC commissioners, the Attorney General, and our state as well as federal legislatures. So I don't know the answers, but I sure am glad to be involved in the questions. And that's where I'm standing right now. I'm really going off on a trip next week to do more inner work on what is my next steps. I'm 78 years old. I dealt with COVID. I've got a family member I'm helping through a difficult time. What can I do? How can I leverage? All of us need to ask ourselves what we have to bring to bear on these issues. So thank you guys for letting me think about these things in verbally.
Your energy is so contagious. Thank you for being on this call with us. We really, really appreciate it, Ms. Joyce.
Amen.
I took much more than 15 minutes. Oh my goodness, sorry.
That's okay. We thoroughly enjoy hearing you.
I think you answered all the questions too.
Right. I think you kind of killed it. But let's talk for a second. There were a few things that you said that I think for our hearing audience, it would be helpful if we could kind of go a little bit deeper in and make it, I guess, a little bit more accessible or manageable. Such as the fact that people, this whole idea of excessive energy burden. And I'd like to say excessive utility burden. because it's really your household utilities um, that are eating up our incomes. Um, but in particular in Alabama, something you alluded to when it comes down to excessive energy burdens, and I found interesting. Alabama has some of the lowest rates for energy in the nation. Utility bills are some of the lowest in the nation. Utility rates are some of the lowest in the nation. But we've got some of the highest utility bills. Can we speak more to that and go a little bit more in depth in why it is that you have such low energy rates but such high energy bills, so that the audience can really understand this energy burden? Well, and then I think we can tie it in even more into how it really connects with our daily lives.
The point you make, you've made that point before in some of the videos I've seen you do, and I really think folks should learn from that, because I did. But the energy burden is this total. What is the percentage of your household income that you have to spend on utilities? And I would say that our rates are really not among the lowest in the nation. We need to compare more correctly, but we do not have energy efficiency approaches. I think you heard from, or hope to hear from Stephen Gooseman. He is an expert in energy efficiency, and our PSC has not chosen to require the Alabama Power or any of the utilities to do that. Back in the day, and I can't remember, I need to look it up, there was an effort by the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, the DECA, to create a state energy plan. There is something called a state energy plan, but it's just who's going to get money from the feds. And so there were hearings that were scheduled, and people were getting excited, and there was a questionnaire that went out. So we did that, and just a few days before the public meetings were to be held, it got shut down. Another thing is that about the same time, a group had applied for some money from, I think it was Southeast Energy, SIA. Anyway, there was to be some money to require a certain amount of energy efficiency. And they thought in the application that when they got the money, that Alabama Power was on board. But when the money was announced, Alabama Power said, we're not going to do that. We don't want to be told how much energy efficiency we have to have. So these are some things that happened several years ago that we need to overcome, because there are voices that say, hey, wait a minute, if they're energy efficient, they'll buy less energy. And there was talk about, well, let's just, the more energy you use, the more we make, and the more we get, and energy efficiency is just shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need to make it payable in a way that is equitable for our energy provider in certain ways, but certainly is a much better help for the household. And you've got something called We Rise. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, we've got We Rise. The reason why we're even having these series of talks is because we're really looking into affecting communities of faith and implementing outreach programs that do weatherize some of our most vulnerable communities first. But we actually want to weatherize the whole Southeast. We don't want to be discriminate in how we do it, but we want to be equitable in meeting the needs of those who pay upwards to 20% of their household income to their utilities. Because on a deeper level, something that I always try to connect back to is the economic injustice. We lock people into poverty and literally kill people through their utilities.
I heard you say in one of your videos that you grew up in a household where sometimes you had to choose between gas for water and heat and food. that is an injustice of a very high order. And that's some of what you're trying to combat.
Absolutely. But it goes again even deeper into that. It locks you into that system. It's not a thing of where you can find your way out of. In particular, if you are a low wealth family, if you are a low wealth, for those who have the means to do so, you pay the bill and you keep going. But if you're a low wealth family or even an elderly person, we don't even think about what it does to people on set incomes. Let's take a case in point with what just happened in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and the grid going down, and the market system being set up the way that it was. You had because of the demand, prices went sky high, and they were automatically drafting out of people's accounts. Well, what if you didn't have it? What about those elderly people who are on set incomes who are living off of their retirement? What happens to those people? Where are those protections for those people? And our first line of defense should be our Public Service Commission or our Public Utilities Commission. But they should be looking out for the best, for what's best for for the public, for the community. But that's just not the case. In particular in Alabama, we have more conspirators than we do have protectors.
Well, Alabama Public Service Commission patted themselves on the back that they were not Texas, and that they did burn coal, and that they were not going to, go off into too many of these alternative energies. Well, of course, it's true that it wasn't the alternatives that were the problem. It was the coal and the natural gas lines freezing up, and they had chosen not to invest in the kind of protections that they needed. Electricity is, we can live without it, but we don't want to. But we can't live without water, and we can't live without food. But electricity and broadband and access like that is becoming very close to one of those necessities. And you're right. It would be very reassuring if we felt like our elected officials were actually weighing the costs and benefits rather than tilting the balance toward the provider, which I feel, based on my outside looking in, is sometimes the case. And we need to pay attention to who those people are and what they think.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean,
Yes,
it
ma'am.
wasn't until I came to college, until like the later half of college, that I realized what the Public Service Commission is. Because even though it controls our water, it controls our electricity, it controls like our transportation essentially, right? Isn't there like, they have to do something with that too? I mean, they control basically almost every sector of our daily lives. And we don't pay attention to the elections. We don't really know who they are or what they do. And I almost feel like it's for a reason. It's a lot easier to get things, for them to do things their way if nobody knows what's going on. So, yeah.
Well, you make a good point. Actually, this water issue, back some years ago, when the city of Birmingham wanted to sell the waterworks to a private concern, the agreement was that they would then be regulated by the Public Service Commission, because if you're a municipal thing, you assume that your city elected officials will be doing it. And they were also supposed to grant a conservation easement on the land around the water sources that they used. They did neither. In 2017, they sort of cobbled together something that looked like a conservation easement, but they've never been under the regulation of the Public Service Commission. And in fact, I think that the SELC, the Southern Environment League Law, excuse me, I'm just getting a little, anyway, the SELC is on behalf of the the Cahaba River Keeper and the Cahaba River Society has brought suit to deal with that question of the inappropriate lack of a conservation easement. I don't think that they're going to be able to bring it under public regulation. And so some small water companies are. Transportation, the only thing they really do is licenses for hauling people. They pay attention to the kind of insurance that you have. So their main force is in electricity and gas.
Well, listen, Joyce, I'm not going to hold you any much more longer than what I've done so far. Cal, did you have any last minute questions or any last questions for Joyce? Or even
no,
comments?
Your comment.
Just a quick comment, kind of a question. First, thank you, Joyce. And one thing, so obviously we're focused on the Public Service Commission here, which, as you say, basically that's 2/3 of the folks in the state. We should focus on them. But for the folks who happen to pay their bill to somebody supplied by TVA, or to somebody who pays their bill to a muni or co-op, how would that change your tactic? Because the PSC is no longer the lever that we need to move their world. Any advice for those folks?
I do, and you are in the lead on one of those options, which is we own it. In other words, the election, I belong to a co-op in Florida for another little house, and we elect the people who run the co-op. But like the PSC, most people do not pay attention. It begins to be just a self-perpetuating situation. And sometimes you wonder about whether the decisions are made in the best interest of the growing economy and the changes toward renewables. So your efforts and other efforts to alert people, wake them up to the fact that they do own it and they do have a right to step up and say more about what they want. So we're talking about activism at all kinds of levels, and the TVA, they have been challenged a lot by perhaps Energy Alabama and others about the way they are funding solar and energy efficiency. So we're at one of the most interesting change points regarding electricity. Coal-fired electricity is over 100 years old, and they just keep adding Rube Goldberg things onto the output end of it. We've got bag houses and scrubbers and selective catalytic, all sorts of things that they try to put in place to keep the pollution down. But yes, and munis, I'm not as sure. There is an association of 11 municipal companies that get together and try to leverage their purchasing power, et cetera. And that may be a place for people who pay to a municipal organization. But some of those municipal folks buy their power from either Power South or Alabama Power or TVA, as do the co-ops. It's a really important time for us to pay attention. And I really think that what you're doing with your various organizations is crucial, because I get real wonky. I'm an academic. I have marched, and I might do some more marching. This is some of these things I've got to, but you can provide the opportunity for people to feel comfortable in making their voices heard. And I think this is an admirable and important function.
I do appreciate it. Out of all the things that I've heard, which was so much, and let me tell you that I treasure you. I remember when I first came to Alabama, and I told you that I was doing Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, and we met, and you seeded $50, and that was the first $50 that we received, and so I treasure you. You don't know how much that validation meant in that moment, and you helped lead the group to really embrace me, and I'm grateful for you all, and hope that we can continue to be a help, and that Alabama Interfaith Power and Light can continue to flourish in the state of Alabama. The thing that I heard out of all that you said, which was so much, is there's opportunities we've got problems, and these problems present opportunities for us to get involved. In particular, for those who are faithful, whether it be faithful to the environment or faithful